In the heart of a bustling Calcutta suburb, forgotten by the people outside, stands the Tully Gun home. For the people inside, too, the world outside might as well be non-existent. Inhabited by the aging and dying remnants of the British Raj, the home is a throwback to the past, an almost unreal world which has all but ignored the passing of the last 34 years. Pictures of the English royal family adorn the walls of the parlor and dining hall, and the residents are at pains to prove their English heritage. Like a portrait gallery from a world gone by, wrinkled faces gaze into the muddled past. Bewildered old people with nowhere to go, no nation to look to, clinging stubbornly to a lifestyle that has vanished into history. Although they are India's only community with 100% literacy, few Anglo-Indians adjusted to the new way of life after independence. The minuscule ethnic group rapidly lost the privileges it had enjoyed under their British rulers and found itself increasingly isolated in free India. A spate of emigrations followed, and today, the Anglo-Indians remain only in secluded pockets in the country. Quote, "I am the last of the Mohicans, alone in the world," wails Miss Carr, an aging spinster who typifies the Anglo-Indian dilemma at the home. There are no words to express my sense of revulsion, regret, and outrage when I read a white woman living in India referring to herself as the last of the Mohicans, inasmuch as she is one of the last representatives of the British Empire, the same British Empire that conquered India in pieces once upon a time, but yes, the same British Empire also that drove the Mohicans to the edge of extinction. The Mohicans in Cree Mahigan, they're not extinct. In fact, in the year 2010, they finally got 330 acres of their homeland given back to them. They had originally asked for a much larger plot of land that they were in fact entitled to. They settled for 330 acres. They had the great misfortune of having as their native land very valuable territory that includes the Hudson River, the river that flows into New York City. It's been much harder for them to hold on to any scrap of land, and obviously, as everyone knows from the famous phrase, the last of the Mohicans, it's been rather hard for them to survive history. The interesting questions about First Nations, Native Americans, are not, in my opinion, those left behind in the past. They're the questions about the future. When I studied Cree and Ojibwe as languages at First Nations University, I was always insisting on this, that I was studying these languages not to study Native spirituality, Native anthropology, nor Native history, at least not in some distant sense. I was interested in the present and future of these people, of these languages. I would ask questions such as, how many years will it be into the future before we translate the Constitution of Canada into Cree and Ojibwe? When will we see the first science textbook, the first history textbook in Cree and Ojibwe? When are we going to see a newspaper in these languages? And yes, I also asked at the university itself, why is it that the no smoking signs are in English? Given that this is supposed to be a university by and for First Nations people, shouldn't there be a little bit of pride taken in having words like no smoking or please wash your hands before you leave the washroom written in Cree, Ojibwe? They could also use Dene or other languages if they wanted to. And the example I tend to use most often on this channel, because I really felt it as someone who also has studied Chinese, it really sickened me that I would go up to a bank machine, take money out of an ATM, a bank machine, and there'd be such a long list of languages to choose from, including foreign languages like Chinese, sometimes Vietnamese, but there would not be a single indigenous language for the native people of Canada. When would that change? Sure, road signs, all of these questions, some of them symbolic, some of them practical. But ultimately, these are all questions about the future of these Native people. And these are questions that nobody is really asking inside the Parliament of the Government of Canada, inside the parliaments, plural, of the provinces of Canada. And that's for one very simple reason. When white people in India became a powerless minority, they asked for a guarantee that seats in Parliament would be reserved for them, so they would have a voice inside the democratic government. It's a tremendously bitter irony that in a world where the same word, Indian, was used for the native people of India, and Indian was used to mean the native people of Canada, in this empire, it was the white British minority, the Anglo-Indians, who had seats in Parliament reserved for them, dedicated to them, for their protection, for their benefit, in the Parliament of India. Whereas in the parliaments of Canada, there never have been seats reserved for our Indigenous people. And on the contrary, most of our parliaments have either been overwhelmingly majority white people or actually 100% white. Yes, at different times, 1 or 2 seats have managed to be elected by Native people, but there is no significant representation of Native people or their interests in our parliamentary system. Quite the contrary. What is the future of Canada's Native people and Native languages supposed to be? At the past and the present, they've been defined by their position of voicelessness inside a system of so-called democracy that existed for the express purpose of silencing them, forcibly assimilating them, ignoring them and marginalizing their existence to such an extent that, as you know if you live in Canada, the United States, most of their problems would take more than 100 years to even be heard or addressed in government. It's routine. You can Google it right now. Conflicts over land ownership that started over 100 years ago, took 20 years to get to court, another 20 years for a ruling, so on and so forth. Nobody would say that the well-being of the Native peoples of Canada or the United States, for that matter, are a priority for either government. And there is a very simple reason for that. That's because the people who would make it a priority literally do not have a voice in the House of Parliament in Canada, do not have a voice in the House of Congress in the United States. That gets at the very basic problem of representation in government, a problem much more fundamental than any particular period of racism. During my lifetime, Canadians have become less racist. There's no doubt. Even though racism towards Native people is still a massive problem in Canada, I've seen it, felt it, heard it many times. Nevertheless, we have to say, racism is on the way out. The problem remains that democracy, that meaningful representation for Native peoples and Native languages, is still not on the way in.